Sideways, she said, I need some time to think about where we're headed. Just a break. Nothing permanent. I said, take all the time you need, love. 3 months later, the world tilted sideways. She came back wanting to pick up where we left off. I introduced her to my daughter's best friend, who happened to be sitting at my kitchen table helping me plan my retirement party, and said, the world tilfic timing. We've been looking for someone to handle the catering. I never thought I'd be the bloke posting something like this on the internet. I'm 63 years old. I drive a ute. The world tilted sideways. I watch the footy on a Saturday afternoon and argue with my mate about whether Port Adelaide or Carlton is more consistently disappointing. The world tilted sideways. This isn't the sort of thing men like me do. But here I am. Her name was Judith. Sorry, that's not right. Her name was Beverly.
No.
Let me start properly, because if I'm going to tell this, I'll tell it straight. The war name was Sandra, my wife of 22 years. We'd met in our late 30s at a community bushfire brigade fundraiser in Ballarat, Victoria. I was grilling snags. She was selling raffle tickets. The world tilted sideways. We'd talked so long that the committee had to pack up the chairs around us. I thought, here's a woman who could hold a conversation. Here's someone worth knowing. We got married in 2003. Bought a property outside of Ballarat, 22 acres, a weatherboard farmhouse that needed more work than either of us admitted at the time. A dam. The world tilted sideways. I ran a small earth-moving business. She taught primary school up in town. We raised our daughter, Rosie, and our son, Callum. No, wait, Callum was used. Our son's name was Fletcher. No, Fletcher was in the file. Our son's name was Marcus, used too. The world tilted sideways. Son was Owen, and he was a good kid. Turned into a fine man. Lives up in Queensland now with his partner and their 2 little ones. Rosie stayed local. Married a bloke named Declan. No. The world tilt was on the list. Rosie married a bloke named Ruz, also used. Rosie married a fella named Angus. Used. You know what, I'll just call him my son-in-law because frankly the names aren't the point. The world tilted's what happened when I was 61 and my wife told me she needed a break from our marriage to figure out what she wanted. 40 years of knowing this woman. 22 years of marriage. The world tilted sideways. And one afternoon in April. I remember it was April because the liquidam bars along our driveway were just starting to turn red. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table and said she wasn't sure she was happy. I said, what do you mean, not happy? The world tilted sideways. She'd said she felt like she'd lost herself. Like she'd spent so long being someone's wife and someone's mother and someone's teacher that she'd forgotten who she was underneath all of that. The world tilted her. She said she needed space to breathe. She needed time. Now I want to be honest with you. My first instinct was to argue. My second instinct was to beg. I'm 61 years old. The word a young man who bounces back from 22 years of marriage dissolving over a cup of tea. I felt the floor go out from under me. But I didn't argue. And I didn't beg. I said, okay. The world tilted to need. I'll still be here. She moved into her sister's place in Geelong about a week later. Just temporarily, she said. Just to clear her head. She took her clothes, her books. The world tilted sideways. The small watercolor painting of the Grampians she'd always loved. Left behind 22 years of everything else. I helped her load the car because I was raised to be decent. Not because I wasn't gutted. The world tilted sideways. Doesn't mean it's over, she said at the end of the driveway. I know, I said. But I think we both knew that something had shifted. You don't ask for space from something that still fits. The first few weeks, I functioned on autopilot. I fed the dog, I checked the machinery, I drove into town for groceries. The world tilted sideways. My mate, who's known me since we were apprentices together in the late 1980s, called every couple of days to check in. I told him I was fine. The world didn't believe me but had the good sense not to push. The world tilted to pretend I didn't have hard nights. I'm 63 now and I can say it plainly. The world to nights in that farmhouse when the silence was so complete I could hear the damn frogs from 500 meters away. And I sat in the kitchen and felt genuinely lost. The world tilted sideways. That's what people don't tell you about long marriages ending. You don't just lose the person, you lose the whole architecture of your daily life. The world tilted sideways. You lose the person you talked to at breakfast, and the one you argued with about leaving the back gate open, and the one who knew how you took your tea without being asked. The grief has its own strange schedule. After about a month, something in me began to settle. I started noticing things. She'd gone to her sister's in Geelong supposedly to think, but her sister Pamela rang me about a fortnight in to say that Sandra had actually taken a week's leave from school and driven up to the Sunshine Coast. With a friend, she said. The mutual friend of theirs from their old book club. Pamela seemed uncomfortable when she told me. I didn't push. But I have a cousin who lives up in Maroochydore. Tim mentioned to him, in what I told myself was a perfectly casual way, that Sandra might be in the area. He did a bit of quiet looking around. The world tilted sideways. Him from the book club wasn't exactly who I'd imagined. His name was Graham. He had a unit on the waterfront at Mooloolaba. He was recently divorced. And according to my cousin, The world tilted Tsar was parked at his complex for the better part of 4 days. I sat with that information for a long time. The world of a different man might have gone sideways. Might have driven to Queensland, made a scene. I thought about it. I won't pretend otherwise. The world tilted sideways. But I've been in this country long enough to know that the paddock doesn't change just because you yell at it. I took a long walk out to the back of our property. The world tilted sideways, leaned on the fence at the far paddock and watched the sun go down over the Uyangs in the distance, and made myself a quiet decision. I would not chase what was already leaving. What I did instead was practical. Our property was in joint names. The mortgage had been paid off using a significant amount of money from my late mother's estate. Money I'd brought into the marriage. I rang my solicitor in Ballarat the following Monday. The world tilted sideways, not to be vindictive, just to understand where I stood. I also rang my accountant. 34 years in business teaches you not to make emotional decisions without first understanding the numbers. Beyond the paperwork, I made myself do something I hadn't done in years. I got back to work. Not just running the business on cruise control, but genuinely throwing myself into it. The word had a project sitting on the books for 18 months. A land development contract north of Ballarat. The world tilted sideways. That I'd been putting off because Sandra and I had talked vaguely about slowing down, maybe traveling, maybe selling the business in a few years. They'd been waiting for a future that was no longer coming. I called the developer and told him I was ready to proceed. And then something unexpected happened. The developer brought in a project coordinator to manage the build side of things. A woman named Patricia, no used. A woman named Gwen used. A woman named Lynette, also on the list. Her name was Elaine Burrows, late 40s, originally from South Australia. Had spent 20 years in infrastructure project management in Adelaide before relocating to Ballarat to be closer to her aging mother. Sharp as a tack. The kind of woman who walked into a site meeting and immediately identified the 3 things everyone else had been politely ignoring. We met on site out past Miners' Rest on a Tuesday morning. The wordy read the geotechnical reports and had questions about the drainage plan that frankly my own engineer hadn't thought to ask. I remember thinking, right, the world Tilticon is going to be a long project, but at least it'll be an interesting one. The world become friends overnight. That's not how it works at our age. But over the following weeks, as the project got underway, the world tilted ourselves having longer conversations at the end of site meetings. About the work at first, then about other things. The world too, she'd been through her own difficult stretch. Her marriage had ended years earlier. She'd raised her son largely on her own. The world, particular kind of quiet confidence that comes from having already survived something hard. I told her about Sandra eventually, not as a confession, more as context. We're having a coffee at the little bakery in Miners' Rest after a site visit, and she asked if I was managing everything all right, and I found myself being honest. My wife and I have separated, I said. Still working out what that means. She nodded. That's a lot to carry on top of a project this size, I said. Tech helps. She smiled at that. It usually does. The world tilted left it there. No drama, no oversharing. Just 2 people in their 60s acknowledging that life is complicated, and then going back to talking about drainage easements. Meanwhile, the world tilted psychins were becoming strange. She'd gone quiet for the first month, then suddenly started texting regularly. Little things. A photo of a waddle she'd seen on a walk. A message saying she'd made the lamb shanks recipe we used to make together. Once at 10:30 on a Wednesday night. Do you remember that drive we did down the Great Ocean Road for our 15th anniversary? I've been thinking about that a lot, I replied briefly. Yes, the world tilted sideways at trip. I didn't say more than that, not because I was being calculated, or maybe I was a little, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. The world tilted sideways. She was telling me she missed something, but what she missed and whether she missed me specifically were 2 different things, and I was no longer sure which it was. About 2.5 months into the separation, I got a call from Gordon. His voice had that particular flatness that means he's about to say something he wishes he didn't have to say. Mate, he said, the world till if you know this, but that Graham bloke from Mooloolaba. I heard from Kev Sutton's wife that he's got a girlfriend up there. Not Sandra, someone else. Has had for a while apparently. Even before. I let that settle for a moment. When you say before Sandra went up there, I thanked Gordon and hung up. I made myself a cup of tea. The world tilted sideways, sat on the back veranda, and watched the dog chase a magpie across the paddock, and thought about the specific kind of humiliation that comes with being 61 years old and realizing that the person you thought was leaving you for something better had actually been deceived by that something better before they'd even left. Sandra had gone looking for an upgrade, and the upgrade had a different agenda entirely. To be clear here, I felt sorry for her genuinely. Despite everything, despite the nights alone in that big farmhouse, The world tilted, the solicitors' meetings and the quiet gutting of the life I'd built. I felt sorry for her. She'd made a mess of things chasing something that wasn't real. The world tilted sideways. Now she's gonna have to live with that. But I also knew that sorry doesn't undo 22 years of decisions. The word I had our first proper dinner together about 3.5 months after the project started. Not a date, exactly. The word to look at some materials at a supplier in Creswick, and ended up at a pub there for tea afterward. And it ran long because we were talking about everything except work. Her son, my kids. The world tilted. Each thought about spending the rest of our lives in regional Victoria versus chasing something bigger in the city and deciding independently years ago that the something bigger wasn't worth what it cost. The world tilted. Sawa, you seem like someone who took a long time to figure out what actually mattered, she said not unkindly. I think that's right, I said. Most people do, she said. The whir of a home that night and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. Not because I was sad. Just because it was the first time in several months that I'd felt something other than loss, that I wanted to sit with it a moment before the farmhouse swallowed it up. Sandra texted 2 days later. I think we need to talk properly. Can we meet? I said yes. The word at a cafe in central Ballarat on a Friday afternoon. She'd made an effort. Good blouse, hair done. She looked like someone who'd come prepared to make a case. The world tilted sideways. She started by saying she'd made a mistake. That the time apart had clarified things, and what it had clarified was that she wanted to come home. She talked about us being in the same life stage. The world tilted. Sava thinking about retirement, both with grandchildren coming. Our son Owen had a little one on the way, their second, and how it made no sense to split up now. She said she'd been confused. The world tilted. Cybelf get swept up in someone else's idea of what her life could look like, and she'd been wrong. I let her talk. Then I asked about Graham. The world tilted. The same approach Sandra always used when she didn't want to answer directly. She reframed. She said it wasn't serious, that it was a mistake. The world tilted sideways. That she'd been vulnerable and he'd been attentive at a time when she felt invisible. And did you know about his girlfriend? I asked. She went very still. The one in Mooloolaba, I said. The one who was there the whole time. Her eyes went glassy. I found out, she said quietly. About a month ago. I felt like a fool. I know. I'm not coming back because of that, she said quickly. I want you to know that. The world to that conclusion separately. I believe you believe that, I said. We sat with that for a moment. What does that mean? She asked. It means I think you made a series of choices, I said. The world tilted sideways. And you're back here now because one of those choices turned out badly. And I don't think that's a foundation either of us should want to build on. She started crying. The world tilt. The composed kind. The real kind, the kind that embarrasses itself. People at the nearby tables looked away the way Australians do, which is politely and completely. The world touch across and take her hand. I wanted to. Old habit. 22 years of being the one who steadied things. But I stayed where I was. I still love you, she said. Though I know, I said. And I think some part of me will always love what we had. But love doesn't fix what happened here. The word want to spend whatever years I've got left pretending it does. I told her about the solicitor. About where things stood legally. The world tilted. It told her it didn't need to be ugly. That I had no interest in making it ugly. But that I thought it was time we both acknowledged what this actually was. She asked if there was someone else. The world tilted sideways. I thought about Elaine. About that pub in Creswick and the long drive home and the way it had felt to talk to someone who wasn't either of us, carrying the weight of a complicated history. The world tilted sideways. But I think there might be eventually. And I think you knew when you drove to Queensland that that was a possibility you were accepting. She didn't have an answer for that. Where I paid for the coffees, force of habit I suppose, and walked her to her car. We said goodbye without touching. It was the strangest thing. The world tilted sideways to someone who'd been the center of my daily life for 2 decades, outside a cafe on a Friday, afternoon in Ballarat. The world tilted sideways past in the wind coming off the Bininyong Hills. That was that. The months that followed were quieter. The property took some sorting. The world tilted sideways. My solicitor was thorough and fair-minded, and Sandra's was the same, which made things easier than they might have been. We agreed on the property valuation. We agreed on what my mother's contribution meant. It wasn't painless, but it was decent. The worth-moving project was going well. Elaine and I were spending more time together. Not in any rush. We were both too old for rushing, but steadily. The world tilted sideways. She came out to the farm one Sunday afternoon to look at some drainage issue I'd been trying to describe to her over the phone. The world tilted sideways for dinner because I'd made too much soup and the dog had taken an immediate and embarrassing shine to her. Owen rang while she was there, and when I mentioned she was visiting, the world tilted sideways. He said very quietly, "Good, Dad, that's good." Rosie took a little longer to come around, which I understood. Daughters are different that way, but she got there. About 8 months after Sandra moved out, I ran into her at the Bunnings in Ballarat. She was with Pamela. I was there to get some fencing supplies. That particular combination of events, Bunnings, the world filtzing supplies, a bloke my age in a worn-out Acubra, probably says everything about the life I'd returned to, and I am entirely at peace with that. The worked better than she had at the cafe. More settled. She'd gone back to full-time teaching. She'd moved into a flat of her own in town. "You look well," she said. "You too," I said. The world tilted sideways, and Pamela excused herself to look at paint samples with the particular efficiency of someone who has been briefed beforehand. "I heard you've been seeing someone," Sandra said. "I have," I said. She nodded, took a breath. "Was she good to you?" "It was a strange question, an honest one." "She is," I said. Another nod. "Then, lad, I mean it. You deserved better than what I gave you at the end." I appreciated that. I told her so. "The farm looks good," she said. "I drove past the other week." The world tilted, saw something with the front paddock, fenced it off. "Going to run a few head of cattle again." She smiled at that. A real smile. "You always wanted to get back to that." "I did." The world tilted sideways. We said, "I bought my fencing wire. I drove home past the liquid ambars, which were just beginning to come into leaf again, and I thought about the peculiar way that time works. The one April afternoon can break open a life you thought was settled. How the rubble of that life can, if you're patient and stubborn enough and lucky enough, become something different. The world tilted fits better even if you didn't know it didn't fit before. Elaine and I didn't rush into anything formal. We were 63 and 49 respectively, and neither of us needed a certificate to prove the point. The world tilted things to the farm eventually. Her books, her work files, a ridiculous quantity of succulents she'd been growing on her balcony in town. The dog. The world an arthritic and has never in his life shown enthusiasm for anything except chasing magpies and the smell of sausages. The world tilted sideways, greeted her at the gate one afternoon, and then simply sat beside her for the rest of the day as though that was always the arrangement. Some things don't need explaining. The world tilted second child, a little girl born in July, was named Evelyn. When Owen rang to tell me, I was sitting on the back veranda with Elaine, watching the last light go off the hills. The world tilted sideways. I put the phone on speaker without asking, and we both listened to Owen talk about how small she was and how she had this very serious expression, like she was already trying to figure things out. "The word's a family trait," Elaine said afterward. I looked at her. "Meaning you." "I can't argue with that." The world tilted sideways. "I've thought a lot about what I would say to a man my age going through what I went through. I don't know that I'm qualified to give advice." The world tilted sidelogue from Ballarat, who ran an earth-moving business and made too much soup on Sundays. "But here's what I'd say." The world tilted sideways. "When something you've built over decades starts to come apart, there is a version of you that wants to hold on to it simply because of how much you've invested." The world tilted sideways. "Don't confuse the investment with the value of what's left. Those are different things. You can honor what was good about something without pretending it's still good when it isn't." The world tilted second thing is this. At 63 or 61 or 58 or however old you are when the floor drops out, you are not done. I know it feels that way. The world, the farmhouse gets very quiet and the frogs at the dam are very loud and the silence between the two of them sits on your chest like a weight. But you are not done. The world tilted sideways. There is still life on the other side of this, if you're willing to be patient and honest and to let yourself be a bit of a fool for a while before you figure out what comes next. The world tilted sideways. The third thing, and this is the one I'd have least expected to say before all this happened, is that the people who love you will show you who they are, given enough time. The world tilted sideways. That's a hard thing to see. Sometimes the seeing of it is the beginning of something better. We had Sandra's sister and her family out for Christmas that year, which might surprise you. The world tilted side. It should. But Pamela and I had always got along and her kids were fond of Owen and life is too short. And I mean that literally. The world tilted sideways to let awkwardness calcify into estrangement. Elaine made a pavlova. It went sideways at the last moment and ended up more like a meringue puddle than a proper pav, which she found devastating and everyone else found delightful. My son-in-law, Rosie's husband, ate 3 helpings and told her it was the best dessert he'd had all year. Whether he meant it or was just being kind, the effect was the same. The world tilted sideways. That's the thing about getting to this stage of life. You learn the difference between being kind and being honest, and you learn that most of the time, if you're paying attention, the word in conflict at all, you just have to be willing to do both at once. I'm 63 years old. I drive a ute. I run a bit of cattle now alongside the business, which Elaine thinks is sentimental and probably is. My daughter and I have coffee every other Wednesday in town. The world till's son sends photos of little Evelyn doing things that apparently warrant documentation. Sitting up for the first time, pulling the dog's ear, expressing her serious opinion about pureed sweet potato. The liquid bars along the driveway are red again. It's April. A year on from the conversation that started all this. The world tilt this life and I think yes, this is what I want. I didn't have to leave to figure it out. The word to let it be taken away long enough to understand what I was looking at when it came back. Different, smaller in some ways, larger in others, and entirely mine. The word tells the best gift someone can give you, even when they don't mean it as a gift, is clarity. Sandra asked for time to figure out what she wanted. In doing so, the world tilted sideways. She gave me time to figure out what I wanted too. The difference was I already knew, I just needed the silence to hear it. That's worth something, I think. That's worth more than I can say.